What is going on, everybody? I am back today to do a part two of a video that I just did part one of recently, which was talking about some of my favorite character study movies. And I had a couple of comments asking me to do a part two because, as I said in that video, character studies are some of my favorite movies. I love films that really take an in depth look at a specific character or what a character represents and kind of dives deeper and leaves you a lot to think about. And I'm excited to give you some more movies today that fall into my absolute favorites. So first up is going to be the film You Were Never Really Here, directed by Lynn Ramsey, starring Joaquin Phoenix as Joe. And what I absolutely love about this movie, and just Lynn Ramsey as a director, is the way that she uses so much nuance to explore these very heavy subjects in her films. And You Were Never Really Here is possibly my favorite movie that she's directed. And it's a very difficult film to watch. It is about a man who hunts down child predators and kills them. And it's a movie where he gets hired to do this very specific job to rescue this one girl. He does, but he finds out that there's a lot of corruption going on and has to figure out how to stop this very large group of criminals. And what I find so fascinating about this movie is there's never any heavy-handed exposition about Joe's character. We learn it through flashbacks and through brief conversations with his mother and just little moments with himself where Joaquin Phoenix gives this very phenomenal, really subdued performance where we can see so much of the hurt and tragedy that he's experienced solely through his facial expressions. And I think that's what makes that movie so very effective. And obviously, whenever you're watching a movie surrounding something as horrible as child trafficking, it's always interesting to see what the takeaway is here. And what I love about it is we learn why he does this and the trauma that he has experienced and what drives him to this point to want to do this type of a work. And I think that it's really just a fascinating portrayal of one specific person. And there's a scene in the third act that I think really is just representative of where his brain is at in every moment of his life that every time I rewatch it, like I'm always like, I know exactly what's coming and it happens and it just eats me alive every time. It's one of those movies, it has almost like a hopeless quality with a shred of looking forward to the future in like the most just kind of dour way possible, but like showcasing that life for some people can be this awful and be this hard. And what I love about Lynn as a director, she does not shy away from showcasing the most raw and real human emotion. She is one of my favorite filmmakers. I know she has a new movie in the works right now that I cannot wait for. Truly one of the best directors in all of the industry right now. And if you've never seen one of Lynn's films, You Were Never Really Here is a very good start. Up next is Robert Eggers' The Lighthouse. I've said this before. I have a tattoo on my arm that is dedicated to the lighthouse. I don't know how that works, but yeah, I have it on, I have it on my arm. I actually have a witch tattoo as well. I love Robert Eggers. He's probably my favorite modern filmmaker, and this movie is one of the most fascinating character studies that I've ever watched. We have two lighthouse wikis, one named Thomas and another named Thomas, one played by Willem Dafoe, one played by Robert Pattinson, and they go to take care of this lighthouse together, and everything is seemingly normal at first until they realize the boat that is supposed to come pick them up isn't going to show, and they both start losing their minds. And what I love about this movie is Robert Pattinson's character, as we're watching the film, is very secretive about his life and his past, and we learn bits and pieces of information about him and what drove him to this point to take this job. Willem Dafoe's character is even more closed off, and what I like about this is Robert Eggers just adds these little things throughout the movie to just keep you questioning, like, what are the motivations of these characters, even at one point where you're asking yourself, are they two different people? And that's what I love so much about this movie is like Eggers does such a phenomenal job exposing more and more of these characters, but also leaving enough of them veiled, like the fact that Willem Dafoe's character wants to be the only one that gets close to the light. And why is that? Why is he so incredibly protective of it? What's going on there? Is there something more sinister happening with him? And then Robert Pattinson's character, when it comes to his past, and did he do something horrible? What's he hiding from? There's even things I noticed in rewatching the film where like he'll have moments with his accent where it feels like it changes just subtly, where it's almost like the entire time he's been putting on a facade to be someone else. And that's what I love so much about this movie. I feel like there's so much nuance in each and every scene that just leaves you guessing. It's also incredibly funny. It's one of the most beautifully shot films, probably one of my favorite films cinematographically of all time. I think it's just remarkable what Robert Eggers and his cinematographer were able to accomplish here. I know they used a lot of old camera equipment. They really wanted it to feel like it came from this period, and I think that's what really makes Eggers such a special filmmaker, and he's 4 for 4 in my opinion. The guy just is incapable of making a bad movie. Up next is Paul Thomas Anderson's film Phantom Thread. This is another one of my favorite films of all time, and I think that Daniel Day-Lewis's performance as Reynolds Woodcock, this might be one of my favorite performances from Daniel Day-Lewis, and it's because his character is so fascinating. I think the way that Paul Thomas Anderson looks at this kind of like tortured artist, or like just a very egotistical artist, and what goes through their head and how they have to live a very specific routine. Little things sort of set them off. They're always striving for perfection, willing to kind of just shut people out of their lives in order to pursue their art. And I think that obsession, that willingness to kind of shut everyone off, Daniel Day-Lewis does a phenomenal job in his performance. And I love Vicky Krieps as Alma in this movie as the love interest, because what's interesting is he showcases in Daniel Day-Lewis's character his ability to be able to kind of shut that part of his personality off, that obsession and that drive and that passion for something, in a way that would help him lead a more modestly normal life, but like comes back into it, and it creates conflict between the two of them. And it's just fascinating to watch this character, and then his ties with his mother, and then where their relationship goes in the third act, and just kind of how strange and very off kilter it all is. And it really goes into a very strange territory that, you know, only Paul Thomas Anderson could take a movie in this direction and have it work so well. And that's my favorite part about a character study, is watching a very specific person and learning all their traits, and seeing how a director can sort of manipulate and change things along the way. And this is a movie, it is masterfully made in every regard. Some of the greatest performances in a film I've ever watched, some of the most remarkable cinematography. I love Johnny Greenwood's score to this is one of my favorite film scores of all time. I listen to it on repeat constantly. I listen to it a lot while I edit videos. It's just truly remarkable, and it's a movie that if you've never seen a Paul Thomas Anderson film, I think this perfectly encapsulates what makes him such a special filmmaker. Next is Paris, Texas from director Wim Wenders. Harry Dean Stanton's performance as Travis in this movie is one of the most remarkable performances I've ever seen in a film, and I love his character. And the reason why is there's so much mystery surrounding who this person is, and we do get more and more revealed as the movie plays out. But what's interesting is he's so quiet and refined into himself, and he has almost this very frail feeling to him. And as the movie goes on, we learn a lot of the harsher realities of who he was as a person, and how he's trying to change, but realizes that he probably can't put his life back to where it was before some of the decisions that he made. And I think that's like the harsh reality for so many people in this world, is that they can cause damage and they can do harm to others, and they can make people's lives really miserable. And the best thing that they can do is try to be a better person and try to make amends for the horrible mistakes that they've made. This movie rips me apart every time I think about it, and every time I watch it. It brings me to tears. It has one of the most beautiful scores to a film that I've ever heard in my life. It's just really a masterpiece for a reason, and I love Wim Wenders, and I think, you know, his newest film, Perfect Days, is another example of just a phenomenal character study, where we just get enough information about a character to want to just keep learning more and keep understanding them. And that's what's really amazing about this movie. It is a masterpiece. I'm so glad it's in the Criterion Collection, and if you've never seen it before, you're really missing out. Up next is George Romero's Martin. I will say this is George Romero's best film and his most underappreciated. This is a movie about a young man who believes that he is a vampire, but he is not a vampire in the traditional sense. He uses a syringe, knocks women out, and then will cut their wrists and drink their blood that way. He doesn't have fangs. He can walk out in the middle of the sunlight, and he is moved into his conservative uncle's house, who believes that he is a demon and says that he is going to take care of the problem, essentially, and that if he finds out that he's killing people in his community, that he will kill him even quicker. And so we're watching this movie play out in front of us as to this character and whether or not is he actually a vampire, or has he just been fed this information his entire life and have been told that he is this specific thing, and because of all the conspiracy surrounding him and the religious trauma that he has clearly experienced, if it has driven him to be this horrible monster. And the movie has a lot of very conflicting and strong emotions, especially when it shows the heinous acts that Martin is committing, as going as far as to sexually assault women before killing them. And it's a very hard movie to watch, but what's interesting is the way Romero can sort of paint empathy towards Martin's character amidst him being this horrible monster and tying so much of that into his upbringing. And I think it's really fascinating because it's almost like Romero just looking at human beings as a whole and saying, like, can people be bad because of all of the exposure that they've had to evil early on in their lives? And I just think that, like, having a director be willing to push themselves into the darkest side of the human psyche, it's important in art. And there's so many people that I feel like nowadays that are very off put by challenging art, and challenging art exists for a reason. We are meant to watch challenging art that pushes us to think about human beings, because I think a lot of times, especially in a movie like this, it unlocks a different understanding as to how people can be formed into monsters. And I just think it's a really fascinating film. It has remarkable cinematography. I love the score to this movie. I actually own it on vinyl. It's very weird, abstract, that I just think accompanies the mood and the tone of the film brilliantly. John Amplas's performance as Martin is just truly remarkable in this film. Everyone that shows up in this just really does a phenomenal job. I rewatch this movie about once a year, and I think it's a masterpiece. And I'm not going to keep you here for a very long time, but I'm going to do one more. And I've talked about this movie a lot recently, and I'm pretty much using the platform as frequently as possible to talk about this film as much as I can, and that's Jane Schoenbrun's I Saw the TV Glow. I think this is one of the most important movies made in the past 20 years, and I think when our society wakes up a little bit more and becomes a little bit more understanding of trans people and their experience, that this movie will be very highly regarded. And I think it's a movie that deserves to be talked about in a much larger way. And I think what's so fascinating about this movie is when we look at Owen and Maddie's characters, because they're two different people that come from different backgrounds, but are both experiencing this feeling of isolation and emptiness and attempting to fully realize their identity. What I love about this movie is Owen is clearly wanting to transition in his life. He wants to transition. We see that through a lot of the visual cues and the utilization of cinematography, but he's afraid to do so. He is afraid to embrace his truest form of his identity, and instead pours himself into this TV program, becomes friends with Maddie, who is clearly also dealing with issues in their identity, and one wants to embrace that identity and eventually does, where the other one will not come to terms with it and just shuts it out and refuses to embrace that identity. And what Jane showcases here through these two incredible performances from these really amazing actors is, like, what happens when you decide as a trans person not to embrace your identity and the horrors that come with that, but trying to constantly reiterate to the audience that it's not too late if that's the way that you feel. And I think there's such a beautiful and emotionally moving element in that. This has some of the most striking visuals I've seen in a movie in probably 20 years. Like, one of just the most visually remarkable films that I've ever seen. It has one of the best soundtracks to a film I've watched in years. It's emotionally moving, it's poignant, it's thought-provoking. Jane is truly just a remarkable artist. I hope they make movies for a very, very long time. I really just admire their work so much. They are easily going to become one of my favorite directors. I also love We're All Going to the World's Fair, a movie that I think, if you haven't seen, much more experimental, very different, but completely and totally worthwhile. And this is just one of the most remarkable films of the decade so far, and I urge you to watch it if you have not seen it. So what are some of your favorite character study movies? Let me know in the comments. I love making videos like this, and it was a lot of fun telling you about some more today. As always, if you can like the video and subscribe to the channel, it helps me out a lot and lets me know the type of content you're looking for. I'm always putting out new material and look forward to getting more out for you in the near future. And as always, everyone, thank you so much for watching and have a great rest of your day.